Kraftwood Gardens, which was a landmark in Antigo's or Langlade County's history from the 1920s to the 1950s. The story begins with the history of the Kraft family. George and Minerva Kraft raised their family in the late 19th century at a time when Antigo was just becoming established. They raised 11 children in their family at Fort Erie, Canada, not far from Niagara Falls. One of their sons, James Lewis Kraft, generally referred to as JL, moved to Chicago in 1903, where he became a cheese wholesaler. In the next few years, some of his brothers joined him in the business, and that became Kraft and Brothers Company. William, the eldest brother, but the last to leave the old family operation in Canada, eventually did join the company. Kraft grew to include methods of preserving cheese as well as wholesale sales. It would branch out into various other food products. In 1920, the company grew so large that they had to expand. While the main operation continued to be in northern Illinois, the company sought a factory in Wisconsin and chose Antigo in 1922. The Kraft Company took over the buildings of the Antigo Brewery, which had recently closed in 1919 due to prohibition. William and his family, the last of the group to move from Canada to Chicago, gladly took over operations of the Antigo plant. He was happy to leave Chicago. He moved to Antigo together with his wife Ida and 9 children to oversee operations in Antigo. What I plan to talk about mostly is not the cheese company, but the Kraft summer estate. J.L. Kraft, the head of the company, came to Langlade County first to assess the area for the possibility of expanding here, and then he oversaw operations initially. He was so taken with the scenery of the area that he decided in 1923 to buy some land for a vacation home. The family initially purchased just over 200 acres of land on the shores of Lake Moxenosiu, also known as Enterprise Lake, just west of Elcho. They would later add more land, eventually totaling 900 acres. J.L.'s wife, Pauline, stated, "We saw a rare beauty in those evergreens and birch shores, haunted by the friendly ghosts of Indians." While much of the land was undeveloped, a portion contains a cluster of 8 cottages used by the Kraft family members and their guests. William Kraft, who really preferred the rural life, even gave up his role as the plant manager in Antigo and moved out to Elcho to oversee this large estate, which eventually became known as Kraftwood. There was a cluster of guest cottages and a common dining room and a chapel all on the grounds for the Kraft family members and their guests. The group of 4-bedroom cottages had electricity, a community dining hall, a community laundry, and a small farm and an ice house. The cottages were supplied with boats, one being a 22-foot fishing boat. As I said, the entire complex became known as Kraftwood. William Kraft continued eventually to manage the home, the estate, and lived in a house on the grounds. When the Kraft family first bought the land, here is the road that went to the Kraftwood estate. A 1928 plat map shows that almost the entire western shore of Enterprise Lake was in the hands of the Kraft family. And a sketch by Bill Kraft, grandson of William Kraft, the estate manager, shows the many buildings that were on the grounds for the guests and the Kraft family. Here is one of the rustic cabins where guests stayed. And here is the dining room, the communal hall, as it appeared originally. It was eventually converted into a chapel. Later, they built another communal family dining hall to replace the one that had been converted into a chapel. William and Ida Kraft, the estate managers, moved into what was originally a log farmhouse, which they modified, and you see here, and it was the home of originally William and Ida Kraft, and then eventually his daughter and son-in-law when they took over management of the estate. Then by 1928, work had begun on a large main house for J.L. Kraft, who continued to be the head of the company. He was the brother who really ran the show. The J.L. Kraft's house elicited some interest. The Antigo Daily Journal even wrote it up in 1928 while the building was being planned. The building was made of California redwood and cost $30,000, a large sum by the standards of the day. The main floor contained a large entrance in the center with a large dining room leading to a solarium on one side and a glass-enclosed dining room on the other side of the entry. Each of these rooms contained a large stone fireplace. There was also a bedroom and a kitchen on the main floor off to the side. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, each with their own bathrooms, and 2 with doors leading out to the balconies. Wood trim in the house was of mahogany, and the kitchen and all bathrooms were tiled using tile from the Kraft Tile Company of California, another family member. Here's the house as it was completed. It's on the left-hand side of the picture. The boathouse is on the right, on the edge of the Enterprise Lake. An example of the tile floors in the kitchen. And the fireplace in the dining hall. As magnificent as the house was, the most obvious feature on the grounds was an Indian totem pole, about 59 feet tall. J.L. Kraft had purchased it in Canada on the west coast on a trip out there, perhaps looking for jade. He enjoyed carving in jade. He brought the totem pole to Antigo and brought it up to be installed in his garden. It was reputed to be the tallest totem pole in the U.S. J.L. Kraft was an accomplished lapidary and collector and carver of jade, and so he made frequent trips to Alaska and the Canadian coast and the northern U.S. Pacific coast in search of jade and semi-precious stones, and also of Indian art and culture, which interested him. In 1926, he negotiated the purchase of 2 totem poles from the Kwakiutl tribe in Alert Bay, BC, Canada. Those familiar with the Chicago lakeshore may recall seeing one of those totem poles in Lincoln Park, where Addison Street meets Lakeshore Drive. While one totem pole remained in Chicago as a gift from J.L. Kraft, J.L. brought the other one to his Kraftwood estate. It was shipped to Chicago by rail and then through Antigo to Kraftwood Gardens by truck after having been cut into 4 pieces. Here is the totem pole situated in its original setting in Alert Bay. And here is the article as it was described, or the description as it was written up in the Antigo Daily Journal on August 13th, 1926. And the journal describes it as follows. The totem enjoys the honor of being the strangest, queerest, and most unusual visitor the lake country has seen. It attracted considerable attention on the street here this morning. Some who viewed it had never seen a totem pole before. None had ever seen one in this city. Considerable difficulty was experienced in getting it out of the Canadian territory, the Canadian authorities being more opposed to the removal of the quaint column of carved wood. Perhaps the thing is more of a curiosity than an object of beauty. Grotesque images of human faces, an alligator head, a bird with an enormous beak, and similar carvings cover the face of the column. The totem pole was set up in front of the main house, which the Kraft family always referred to as the big house up at Enterprise Lake. Here's an aerial view. The house is on the right, the main house, and the totem pole is not too visible in this picture, but from the house you walk out onto a path that leads you into the main gardens of the Kraft estate. There were various gardens in the 6 acres of land that were cultivated for flower gardens. There was a Greek garden, so named for its statuary, a rose garden, a dahlia garden. There was a sunken garden containing carnivorous plants, and a large cactus garden. In all, there were 30,000 to 50,000 plants cared for by a gardening staff of 5. Again, some views of the big house with the totem pole right next to it. This interesting feature across from the area that they called the Bethesda Pond was a place where some Native Americans would camp in the summer. It's thought that they generally came looking for blueberries. These were Mole Lake Chippewa. When they eventually had a more permanent home at the Mole Lake Reservation, they stopped coming here, but J.L. Continued to invite them to come. He enjoyed having them on the grounds, and he eventually set up a display of Native American teepees and crafts, and had some old Indian masks, which he had on the grounds. Here's some more views of the gardens. The Cactus Garden was particularly challenging because these were all dug up each fall and moved into a greenhouse over the winter. There was also a fenced-in area with a duck pond and deer roaming around. In the background here is a windmill. This windmill provided water for the households and was also used to irrigate the plants in the garden. Next to the big house was an overlook. Down below is a boathouse which held the canoes and rowboats for visitors to the Kraft family. The greenhouse was next to William and Ida Kraft's home, the home that had been converted from a farmhouse, and it was used to maintain the plants that were in the garden. J.L. Kraft employed a total of 5 people who worked in the greenhouse and on the grounds as gardeners. Much of the buildings on the grounds had fallen into disrepair by the 1960s. This is the greenhouse, which has eventually been demolished. There was a magnetic rock on the grounds, and the legend says this magnetic iron boulder found in Chuckawalla Mountains, Southern California. If an unmarried woman drops a hairpin on it and it does not fall to the ground, she will be married within a year, so they say. And as you can see, there are many women who tried it by throwing their hairpins at this magnetic rock. J.L. Kraft also installed this, what he called the worry stone. You were supposed to sit there and think about all the things that worry you, and your worries would go away. J.L. Kraft and his wife Pauline were so enthralled with shells that they had seen on a visit to Florida that they actually purchased a truckload of shells and came back to decorate their shoreline. They established this little island of shells just off the main house. Every year they would have to buy another load of shells to replenish the island. Another interesting feature of the grounds was a museum. J.L. Kraft was a collector of almost anything. And here he built a museum that displayed some cut-open meteorites, which greatly interested him. But the main feature of the museum was a display of hundreds of stuffed birds from a collection assembled by a woman in Mississippi. Kraft purchased the collection and brought it here for his own museum. Of the various birds, some of the birds displayed the story, the child's story of who killed Cock Robin. Another view of the museum. Pauline Kraft was very proud of her Chris Kraft boat, Shotzi, and many residents and guests were taken for rides there, and other people who lived on Enterprise Lake remember that she would tear back and forth in her motorboat. After World War II, they also purchased one of these amphibious jeeps and used it to ride around the lake. Far removed from the main house, William Kraft's log house and cottages, they built a large barbecue. J.L. and Pauline Kraft would entertain friends and family at this point, with J.L. being in charge of the barbecue. He had a small channel cut in the peninsula so that the family could drive their Chris Kraft boat right up to the picnic area. An interesting side story of this involves a day when the Kraft family had a large barbecue. Sparks from the barbecue started a fire that threatened to get out of control. Outside of Elcho, quite close by, was a CCC camp, Civilian Conservation Corps, and the crew was called to put out the fire. The head of the crew was George Herman, and he so impressed JL with his organizational skills that JL hired him on the spot to work at Kraft Cheese. George Herman eventually worked his way up to become Vice President of Engineering at Kraft. The original home of William Kraft was eventually taken over by his daughter Ruth and Roy Anderson, her husband, and they managed the estate after William's death. An aerial view of the main grounds at Kraftwood Gardens. And you can see where various parts were located. The museum down at the lower left on this slight peninsula with that pool of Bethesda and the Indian teepees. Towards the upper right is the Shell Island, the shells being imported from Florida. Upper right center is the main house with the totem pole. And behind, on the upper left, is the deer park and the produce gardens, which is basically where the family got a lot of their vegetables. One of the interesting things is that J.L. Kraft had many family members. They would come up for visits, and the wives and children often would spend the entire summer at Kraftwood, with the husbands working in Chicago coming up for the weekend. They would take the train to Elcho on Friday afternoon and stay until Sunday evening. James Platt was a nephew of J.L. and Pauline Kraft. He recalls that as a boy, the families would drive to the Elcho train station to greet the men coming up for the weekend. As the train came into the station, they would all sing, "Kraftwood will shine tonight, Kraftwood will shine. Kraftwood will shine tonight all down the line." Then the whole group would head across the station for ice cream, a milkshake or a root beer float, and then go on home. On Sunday evening, there would often be a song fest at the main house with Pauline playing the piano. Sometimes they went to the Woodland Lodge across the lake for Sunday dinner. Then the whole group would head back to the Elcho train station, where the men would take the overnight train back to Chicago, and those remaining would sing, "Kraftwood will wine tonight, Kraftwood will wine." It was Bill Kraft and his wife Ida and their 9 children who lived at Kraftwood all year round and took care of the place. The children went to local schools either in Antigo or in Elcho, and almost all of them eventually worked at Kraft in some manner or another. The only child who ended up not working at Kraft was Mildred, who married somebody who did. When Bill Kraft died in 1940, his eldest child, Ruth, and her husband, Roy Anderson, moved into Bill and Ida Kraft's house and managed the estate. Ruth Kraft had met Roy Anderson when they were both working at the Antigo Kraft cheese plant. Here are some of the children of William and Ida Kraft. Sally Ann in the center eventually worked at the Chicago office and then came back to Elcho. Oops. There are still a great many people in this area who have photo albums, family albums, with pictures of Kraftwood Gardens. Many of these people have allowed the museum to share these photos, and that's where they come from. Here is the worrying stone, where you're supposed to sit and worry your worries away. But as you can see, not all people have worries. Some just enjoy climbing the stones. This was the guidebook that was made available to everybody who would come to the gardens. This was a free guidebook they handed out. It outlined the various gardens and told the story, the Who Killed Cock Robin, and described the various displays in the museum. The entrance to the garden had these lines of a verse by Dorothy Frances Gurney posted on a sign. The kisses of the sun for pardon, the songs of the birds for mirth. One is nearer God's heart in a garden than anywhere else on earth. Part of the garden also had part of the program had a score of a little song about Kraftwood Gardens. And a description of the walkways and how one garden leads to another, and with little lines of poetry to lead you from one stage to the other. Visitors were provided with wash-up towels. When J.L. Kraft died in 1953, the gardens continued to stay open for a brief while, but within 2 years they were closed to the general public. Today, part of the estate has been sold to the Boy Scouts, part is a public boat ramp, and some of the land still remains within the family. J.L. and Pauline Kraft's daughter, Edna Kraft Dahlberg, continued to use the house, and today her son, James Kraft Hardy, and his wife, Diane DeRossi, maintain the house. On one weekend a year, they invite people to come and look at what Kraftwood is now, and he's there you see him in the white cap, James Kraft Hardy, taking a group through the gardens, and he is attempting to restore much of it. The house is in very good repair. The totem pole has recently been restored, and the overlook, just overlooking the lake from the house, is so structurally sound that I've been told it will outlast all of us with little needed maintenance. But many of the other buildings have fallen into disrepair, and some of them have been removed. The motorboat, Schatzi, the Chris Kraft, was restored by the Richardson brothers of Enterprise Lake around 1990. Sanibel Island was the island of shells that J.L. Kraft had imported from Florida. Now the area has been filled in with earth and pine needles. Probably there are still a few shells in there. It's been said that one of the reasons J.L. Kraft had to replenish the shells with a fresh truckload every year, was because many people took home a shell as a souvenir, the visitors that would come by charter bus. The overlook is still structurally sound. Behind it, you see a little bit of the main house peeking through. This is a current photograph. And as I said, it's being partially restored and will continue to be restored by descendants of J.L. Kraft. But even more than 50 years after the public toured the grounds, there are many people who fondly remember a summer's day spent at Kraftwood Gardens. William and Charlotte Kraft helped a great deal with these photographs. William is the grandson of the William Kraft who managed the estate. John and Mary Creha worked at the Kraft Cheese Company in Antigo and also provided much of the information for this story. The Antigo Daily Journal was kind enough to let us use a lot of their computer equipment to make copies of the photographs and slides. Connie and Jim Hubach provided some of the pictures of the grounds as they are today. And Audrey Teagues, the gardener who worked for Kraft, provided me with a lot of information about the garden.